Sorry again about the lack of uploads, I'm still getting used to this whole fatherhood and YouTuber thing, but yeah, today we're going to be benchmarking the brand new Ghost Recon Breakpoint with some budget graphics cards. Let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Zach's Tech Turf. Today we're going to be teaming up with Lil Wayne and benchmarking the new Ghost Recon Breakpoint.
Guys, come on, guys.
So what do we do now?
No, sorry, it's just me. Today, I'm going to be benchmarking by myself Ghost Recon Breakpoint with some budget graphics cards. And if you're new here and you want to see other benchmarking videos just like this one, then hit that subscribe button down below and also that notification bell. That way you never miss an episode. But yeah, let's get to testing. For today's testing, we have our normal roundup of 8 popular budget graphics cards, and of course we also have the AMD Ryzen 5 3400G's integrated graphics for those of you interested in that. For the AMD side of things, we have the RX 560, RX 570, and the RX 580, and over on the NVIDIA side, we have the GTX 750 Ti, GTX 960, GTX 970, GTX 1050 Ti, and finally the GTX 1060. For our testing platform, today we're going to be testing these GPUs with the AMD Ryzen 5 3400G, like I said earlier, because this isn't an overkill system and it actually makes sense for most of these GPUs. There's also 16GB of Team Group 3000 MHz DDR4 RAM, and the game is installed on a 120GB AirI SSD. Housing this benchmarking rig is this monster Darkbase 900 Pro Rev 2 case. Booting into the actual game, here's what the graphics setting page is looking like, and I would say that it has a pretty decent mix of options here, including some presets, which is what we'll be working with today. As always, if you're not interested in the presets and you want to learn how to completely tweak and customize every individual setting, then I would highly recommend checking out Hardware Unboxed video up here. One thing to note on the settings page is that by default, no matter what card you use, the temporal injection and anti-aliasing were both turned on, so that's how I'll be testing all of these GPUs. One thing that's going to make our testing really easy is that the developer included a much appreciated built-in benchmarking tool, just like our other recent benchmark with Borderlands 3, and it's actually a really long 3-minute one, so we'll get some pretty accurate results. One thing to note is that I was actually seeing about 5 less FPS in the actual game compared to the results of the benchmark, but with a huge open world map, this number could fluctuate a lot and it all depends on which zone you're currently in. While running the benchmark, there's also a beta tag in a couple of spots, so hopefully that's indicating that the developers are actually still working on improving the system, so it might be even better in the future. I really love that while running the actual benchmark, it shows you the necessary information that you need, such as FPS and CPU and GPU utilization. You can see that this game is very GPU dependent and the 3400G didn't bottleneck us at all with any of these graphics cards. Once the benchmark is over, you can choose to see extended stats, and I really like this because it gives you like a post-action report of how well the benchmark ran with some pretty cool stats. The useful ones that I like are an overall score so you can compare it to others, the FPS results of course, frame times, load percentages, and there's even a temperature monitor, which is baller. We've been getting really lucky with some of these recent releases with their built-in benchmarking tools. Gears 5 had a really good tester as well, but with all this out of the way, let's finally get into the actual results. Here's a chart showing what all of these GPUs can do with the exact same settings, 1080p and low. We'll get into the individual benchmarks right after this, but I really like including this chart so you can see exactly how these GPUs stack up side by side. This chart also gives us our first indicator that Ghost Recon Breakpoint is a very demanding game, especially with that open world, and it's not running that smoothly on budget graphics cards. You absolutely hate to see that something even as beefy as the 8GB RX 580 GPU only pushing out a measly 72 FPS in low settings. Getting into the individual benchmarks though, starting with the AMD side of things, we have the 4GB RX 560, and for this one I only got 46 FPS in 1080p and low, so I decided to keep the settings there but drop the resolution scale down to 80%, and with this I got a much more playable 53 frames per second. Following that was the 8GB RX 570, and here I could actually push the settings up a bit to 1080p in medium, and here I averaged 57 FPS, which is just under our target 60 FPS mark. Wrapping up our AMD cards, we have the 8GB RX 580, and in 1080p I could surprisingly get the settings up to high, and here I averaged 63 frames per second. Switching over to the NVIDIA side of things, we have the super budget GTX 750 Ti, and in 720p and low settings, which is pretty much as low as I'll ever go for these videos, here I only averaged 47 FPS. This was certainly playable, but not ideal results with this cheap hardware. Stepping up a bit, we have the 2GB GTX 960, and in 1080p and low settings, I still decided to drop the resolution scale down a bit to 90%, and with that I averaged definitely a playable 52 frames per second. Following that was one of the best value used cards on the market right now, the GTX 970, and in 1080p I could get the settings up to medium and I averaged 57 FPS. The GTX 1050 Ti came up next, and for this one I had to keep the settings the same as our chart earlier, 1080p and low, and with this I averaged 57 frames per second. And finally, for our last NVIDIA card of the day, the 3GB GTX 1060 followed up last, and in 1080p I could still only get the settings up to 1080p and low. The GTX 970 did much better than this one somehow, and here I still only managed to average 51. For our last benchmark of the day, the integrated Vega 11 graphics with the Ryzen 5 3400G was up next, and for this one I could only manage to squeeze out a 37 FPS average with 720p and low settings. Well, there you have it. Those are the results, and yeah, just like the chart hinted earlier, this one is definitely not that optimized of a title. If you're thinking about picking up Breakpoint, I would highly suggest making sure your gaming PC is beefy enough, and if not, then feel free to check out one of my build guides because I've definitely made some recently that can easily handle this title. Well, there you have it. That's going to wrap up my benchmarks for Ghost Recon Breakpoint with some budget graphics cards. As always, drop a comment down below about what results you're getting, because maybe you'll help someone out in the comment section that doesn't have one of these GPUs. After that, feel free to head on over to one of these two videos if you haven't seen them yet, and definitely hit that subscribe button, because coming up next, a gaming PC build guide that a lot of you have been asking for. You don't want to miss that video.